Very much.
Okay. I will try not to bump into the microphone as I turn the pages. As Dr. Cowie said, the paper is titled First Chalcolithic Period Burials in Armenia. And I'm going to go ahead and read whatever I have. The ancient cemetery of Aknalich, located near the village of the same name in the province of Armavir, is a large burial complex which was used by prehistoric communities for nearly 5,000 years, from around 4,500 BC to 500 BC. The prehistoric monument is under threat of urban development and agricultural practices, as you can see from the houses built right on the territory of the site. Yet it is one of the most important prehistoric burial grounds in the southern Caucasus. Thus, the Institute of Armenian Archaeology and Ethnography conducted rescue excavations in 2007 and 2011 to try to salvage whatever is still there. A total of 6 tombs were excavated, 2 of which, tomb number 5 or Kurgan 5 and 6, date to the Chalcolithic period, also called the Copper Age. The remaining 4 burials date to the different phases of the Late Bronze Age from 1650 BC to 1200 BC and to the Iron Age, dated between 800 and 500 BC. The main goal of this paper is to describe the 2 Chalcolithic tombs which were previously unknown in the territory of Armenia. In fact, such finds are rare throughout the entire region, and thus far there are only 6 known from Azerbaijan and 1 in Georgia. Our excavations revealed that both Chalcolithic period burials were partially damaged by later intrusive burials. Kurgan 5 had 2 different burials from the Late Bronze Age that were intrusive into the Chalcolithic period, and another from the Iron Age, while Kurgan 6 had a single Late Bronze Age intrusion and a modern cement construction of Soviet era. And you can see, I don't know if you can see, but the rectangular sort of construction over the circle stone one is the Soviet era construction. And this is a common feature of prehistoric archaeological sites, the Soviet era intrusion, that is. The excavations revealed that both Chalcolithic period burials, oh, sorry, I just read that. And I think he has a couple of more slides just showing in pencil drawings the burials and the intrusions. And you can see the Bronze Age and the Iron Age intrusions are right on the larger 25 diameter Chalcolithic period burial. Here is a second drawing. And this is a detail of Kurgan 5. The burial chamber of Kurgan 5 was dug into the ground and lined with roughly rectangular, tough blocks, which were likely brought in from some distance, as there are no natural tough outcrops near the site. In burial number 5, the deceased was placed on the uneven floor of the burial chamber on the right side, in a tightly flexed position and facing westward. A rock was placed under his head as if to cushion it. Burial number 6, in contrast, was constructed of basalt blocks collected at the nearby outcrops. As in Kurgan 5, the chamber which was dug into the underlying bedrock was oriented northeast. The individual was placed on the uneven floor on his back with the head turned to the left and facing north. The bones of the individual were not as well preserved as in number 5, and they were somewhat disarticulated, though this is likely due to various decay and erosion processes. Laboratory examinations made it possible to establish the sex and age range of the individuals. Pronounced brow ridges, the robustness of the occipital bone, and the distinct mental protuberance all suggest the individuals are male. based on suture closure of the individual in Kurgan 5. He was between the age of 35 and 50 at the time of death, while the close epiphyses on the second indicate that he was at least 25 but no older than 45 at the time of his death. One of the most interesting features of burial 5 was traces of artificial deformation and trepanation. The deformation of the skull was done intentionally and is a result of cultural practices and beliefs. And you can see the deformation, sort of the oval or oblong skull rather than the typical round one that we have. The deformation of the skull begins in infancy and can be achieved either by tightly wrapping the cranium or applying pressure, and you see here reconstructions of how the skull deformation is achieved. And ethnoarchaeological studies have shown that it is always it is always an indication of status or rank. The more pronounced the deformation, the higher one's social and presumably political and economic status. The trepanation, on the other hand, was done for two main reasons, and trepanation is just drilling a hole into the skull. First, to cure an illness, holes were drilled into a person who was displaying what was considered to be an abnormal behavior in order to let out the evil spirit causing the aberrant behavior. Evidence of trepanation has been found in prehistoric human remains from the Neolithic period, so from much older periods. And cave paintings and historical accounts indicate that people believed that practice would cure what we now know to be epileptic seizures, migraines, and mental disorders. Of course, in the Neolithic and prehistoric times, they didn't have names for these illnesses, but based on the description of the symptoms, we now know what these probably were. The bone that was removed was kept by prehistoric people and may have been worn as a charm to keep evil spirits away. And the second practice for trepanation was a form of primitive emergency surgery after head wounds to remove shattered bits of bone from a fractured skull and to clean out the blood. Such injuries were typical of primitive weaponry such as slings and war clubs. And this is an image of the trepanation from the, one of the burials that they excavated at Aknalich. In addition to the human skeletons, we found a small number of animal remains, pottery fragments, and stone tools. We were able to identify some of the better preserved animal bones as belonging to a mouflon, sheep, and a coot, which is a type of a water bird, in Kurgan 5, while in Kurgan 6, they found remains of a mouflon, sheep, hare, and an owl. With the comparison of the two late Chalcolithic burials, a pattern of burial goods seems to emerge, and the presence of both wild and domestic species, along with a combination of land and air animals, is particularly noteworthy. So they're drawing from all the resources that they have around them, both domesticated and wild. These remains are not only a clear indication of burial practices and beliefs in the afterlife, as food was placed with the deceased for use in the afterlife, but they also give us a good idea of the animal species that existed in the region 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. Although the Chalcolithic period uncovered from the two Aknalich tombs is quite fragmented, there are some samples with distinctive features. On the basis of technological and morphological study, it is possible to divide the pottery finds into 5 distinct groups. I will not get into the details of each group, but it will suffice to say that both locally made pottery and imported pottery was used by the Chalcolithic period inhabitants of the area. While the local pottery gives us a very clear picture of the diversity of coexisting technologies at the local level, the imported pottery speaks of contact and likely exchange between the inhabitants of the Armenian highlands and the neighboring regions. The stone implements uncovered from both kurgans are made exclusively from obsidian of different coloration and texture, ranging from black and gray to reds and browns, which suggests the use of multiple sources, likely from Mount Arteni and Terasar. Obsidian is a volcanic glass found abundantly in Armenia, colloquially called Satani Yerung or Satan's nail, and it formed an important part of prehistoric cultural material and was used for making tools and weapons. In total, over 120 pieces were recovered. The toolkit is comprised of different types of knives, sickle inserts which would have been used during agricultural harvest, and various arrowheads. The knives and sickle inserts have distinct evidence of resharpening of the edge, which indicate vested interest in recycling or preserving the tool for future use. Other tool types, such as end scrapers and burins, which are engraving or carving implements, are evidence of leatherworking and woodworking by the Chalcolithic communities. In addition to typological dating using burial architecture and pottery styles, the two burials were radiocarbon dated using a tooth from one of the buried individuals. The time range, 4,300 to 4,050 calibrated BC, obtained from the tooth, coincides nicely with our understanding of the chronological position of archaeological material found from the excavations. They have close parallels with the materials from two recently discovered and briefly excavated settlements of Mushakan and Nekin Sasnashen. They probably belong to the final phase of the Middle Chalcolithic and date between 4,500 and 4,300 BC. Based on the results of the study of archaeological materials and radiocarbon data, it can be stated that kurgan 5 and 6 of Aknalich chronologically precede similar late Chalcolithic funerary monuments dated between 4,000 and 3,700 BC in the territories of Georgia and Azerbaijan. The fact allows us to hypothesize that the spread of the early Kura-Araxes culture in the mid-4th millennium BC in the region begins somewhere in the territory of modern-day Armenia and most likely has its roots in the architectural, burial, and ritual tradition of the Middle and late Chalcolithic complexes of the Armenian highlands. It is our hope that future excavations at Aknalich will add not only to our knowledge of Chalcolithic period burials in Armenian highlands, but also help to elucidate the sociocultural developments and trajectories in the region. And thank you.